Are Jews generic? This is the title of Chapter 2 in Thomas Sowell's Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And what Thomas Sowell means by that is the vitriol and condemnation and the expulsion of the Jewish people unique to their race alone? And he says, no, that's not the case. Some of these people include the Igbo in Nigeria, Indians and Armenians in Russia, Japanese in Peru, Scots in Poland and Prussia, and even blacks were resentful of the blacks from the Caribbean for being middlemen before World War II. Middlemen refers to the occupation that all of these groups in question have in common, including the Jews. Jews were seen as blood-sucking vampires and parasites, positioning themselves between the manufacturers and the consumers. And people in these societies often think that these people are just feeding off of the hard labor of the people that actually make the products. But despite these views of them having an easy life, this wasn't the case for many of them. A lot of them arrived to various countries without even speaking the native language or having any skills at all. A lot of them became peddlers, selling straight to society from the goods that they could carry on their back, and eventually working their way up to even owning their own shops. And this was not easy for them either. Oftentimes they would still be living in the shops that they owned and living in a nearby room, or sometimes even in the corner, working 80 hours a week and getting very little sleep, and sometimes still making very little profit. But nonetheless, the people in these societies viewed the Jews as being lazy or feeding off of their work. And oftentimes these Jewish people would not assimilate to the society that they arrived in, leading them to become ostracized in society. And because they stuck with their own people, they practiced nepotism heavily, which is still seen today. But nepotism isn't necessarily a bad thing. It was less risky because they would work with people that they knew and that they could trust. But eventually expulsions from many societies occurred. And Thomas Sowell says that it's basically because the people in these societies were jealous of the Jewish people. No one liked to see someone coming into their territory with very few skills, no money, didn't even speak the language, and somehow finding a way to become more successful than the people living there. This would lead the indigenous people in these societies to become jealous of the Jewish people. In the book, Thomas Sowell says that if people have the option to hate themselves for their failures or others for their success, they will oftentimes choose hating others for their success. And expulsion was oftentimes not good for societies, because these middlemen played a very important role. Sometimes the expulsion of the middlemen could lead to starvation, but not because of a lack of food, but because of a lack of distribution. Oftentimes, food would rot on sea decks. So why have the Jewish people been so successful? Well, one of the reasons was obviously hard work. Another one was that education was a priority, even when illiteracy was the norm for the people around them. A Russian official in 1818 reported on the Jews, saying almost every one of their families hired a tutor to teach its children, and their entire population studies. So the hatred towards the Jews is not unique towards them. Thomas Sowell ends the book with this quote: "However unique any of these groups may be, historically, the kind of hostility and hatred they have faced has been generic." But this still doesn't explain why the Jewish people have been expelled by various nations 109 times.